Hello and welcome back to my studio. It's Lois here from Lois and Morgana Davidson Art, and today I'm going to be showing you how I sketched out this scene here. This is a preparatory sketch for a painting that I want to do in a bit more detail, but I'm just trying out ideas and colours here just to see if it works, and using the line and wash style. When we do fairly detailed preparatory sketches like this in watercolour, it's a great way to find out whether our ideas that we are thinking will work actually do work on the page. And then we can make any changes that we need to as we move forward into the finished painting. And I'll be talking about the changes that I've decided that I want to make at the end of the video after the demo. But first, a quick plug for my new book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner. It's now available to purchase from all good online bookstores in the UK and available to pre-order from elsewhere. So now on with the preparatory sketch. I'm using the back of an old painting. It's taped to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape. And I'm just going to sketch out the design in pencil first. And because it's a line and wash painting or pen and ink painting, I'm then going to go over my pencil sketch with waterproof fine liner. My waterproof fine liner is a 0.5 nib Faber-Castell Artist Pitt pen. So I'm going over my pencil sketch, and you can see that I'm roughing in my composition, which is a little old cottage, a dry stone wall, a tree, some distant mountains and some sort of scrubby grassland in front of this sort of rugged little mountain highland cottage. So here's the line work drawing. I'm going to be painting this wet in wet, and to start with I'm just going to get in a blue sky with a few clouds. For this I've chosen to try out cobalt blue and ultramarine blue and see how that works, and I shall bring the clouds down, or the sky colour down over the mountains, and then a little bit of that into the foreground for shadows. My brush is a 1.5 inch Princeton Aqua Elite synthetic modeler brush. I find it really useful and often paint entire paintings just with this one brush. For this sketch, I've got no pressure. I don't mind if things go wrong. I'm just roughing in ideas. At the moment I like the look of the sky, keeping it really simple like this. And now I'm going to try to introduce sort of the rough, rugged, brackeny, grassy foreground that I'm looking for. And I'm using raw umber, raw sienna and some sap green just to rough in the colour. I want sort of grassy area in front of the cottage, and then this more tangled sort of brackeny suggestion of this kind of rough ground in the foreground. And I'm quite liking the way the colours are working at the moment. And now I'm just using Payne's Grey to drop in some shadows here and there into the damp washes, so that these shadows will soften, diffuse and lighten up, and then I can emphasise them later on when I finish the painting off using the wet on dry technique. I'm going to scrape into the paint with my palette knife and see whether I like that effect. This is another reason for these kinds of preparatory sketches. If you're not sure whether you want to just use brushwork or whether you want to use some slightly different techniques like scraping through the wet paint with a palette knife, it's good to try this out in a preparatory sketch first. And as I continue to work into the wash with the palette knife or with brushes, I'm trying to reserve judgment until the end of the painting. In other words, I'm not worried about the painting failing or anything not working. In fact, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking to test my ideas, and an important part of testing the ideas is, of course, to see what doesn't work. So continuing to try to build up texture and tone. And I think I'm fairly happy with that for now. I need to leave this to dry completely, then I can come back and continue with the painting using the wet on dry technique. So here's how it looks. It's okay. I quite like the colours. I think it might be a little bit dull, but again, that's why I'm executing this preparatory sketch. But we won't know until we put in those beautiful contrasting and rugged mountains across the background, which should really push our cottage forward and make it stand out. I'm using a size 14 Escoda Perla synthetic round brush for this. And this mixture here is a mixture of ultramarine blue, a little bit of alizarin crimson, a bit of Payne's Grey, and a touch of the raw umber. You can see I'm painting around my cottage with this colour, and I'll work across the whole range of mountains with either darker or paler versions of this colour to try and build up some depth and distance. I'm now dabbing in a few touches of quite bright, rich burnt sienna into the dry stone wall, and this hopefully will keep the attention or start to build the attention around my cottage. These brighter pops of sort of reddish brown against the green will help to lead the viewer's eye to the cottage, and then adding some of the shadow colours from the mountains along the dry stone wall, then I can add a little bit of that same shadow colour into the foreground and try and sort of link the painting or the sketch in that way. Now to paint in my fine twigs at the end of the branches and a little sort of suggestion of some foliage. So I'm going to use dry brush to create these. You can see I'm being quite careful. I tested the paper with my finger. I touched it to make sure it's bone dry. And now what I'm doing is putting a dry mixture of a sort of greenish, brownish green across the tips of the twigs and canopies. Try not to cover, so you see my brush is skimming across the texture of the paper. This is Milford cold press watercolour paper, so it's got a nice texture, and if I'm careful and if my paint mix is nice and dry, then I can get this nice dry brush effect, which just gives me that very sort of rugged, scraggly look of a tree that's sort of trying to grow up in the most difficult of circumstances in the Highlands. Building up a bit more tone in the wall. And now I think it's time to focus on the cottage. I've just got a sort of a bit of brown, almost paint water, pulling that across the cottage. You can see it's just dirty paint water really, and then maybe a really, really watery version of my mountain colour, sort of heathery colour, and that just gives a little bit of tone to my cottage walls. This is burnt sienna, and that gives me my tiled roof. Using my 3/4 inch flat brush. Then just going to introduce a little bit of brown into the tree trunk and some of the branches, and then some Payne's grey for the shadows. This is a rigger brush, really nice for these fine lines. And of course, all I'm doing is just following my line work that I put in at the beginning of the painting, which makes this stage really easy. Strengthening up that shadow. This time I shall pull across some shadow shapes for the canopies across the grass. I'm quite happy with that effect actually. Maybe a little bit more. And I think I'm going to stop now. So that's the end of my sketch. Let's have a look, see how it looks without the tape and with a clean white border. It's a lot easier to sort of assess it impartially, non-judgmentally, but with a critical eye. When we see it with a clean white border like this, it's like being able to look at it with fresh eyes. And so I can now see that I think overall I like the ambience and the atmosphere that these colours have created. I think the foreground and the midground are reasonably successful. They just need a bit of refinement and a lighter touch so they don't look so overworked. I'm happy with the cottage. The mountains, not too keen on that sort of violet-y colour. I think I shall work on trying to get a colour that works to push the mountains back in the painting, but that's not quite so sort of violet-hued. The sky is nice. I like the combination of ultramarine and cobalt, and I shall move forward using that combination in my painting. But the thing that I'm not at all keen on is the tree. I like it as an individual piece, and I like the tree shadows on the ground, but slap bang in the middle of a painting like that, it doesn't work in the composition. It draws the eye too much. So in my painting, I've got to either move the tree further to the left or to the right, or remove it completely. At the moment, I'm thinking it'd be better to remove it completely from the composition and just have it as a lonely cottage nestled at the foot of the mountains. So I think it was time well spent for me, spending that time making this preparatory watercolour line and wash sketch, because now I've got a much better idea of how to move forward and how to create a really nice painting if I just refine my ideas a bit and change the composition up a little. So I hope you found that interesting. Please leave us a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, because it really helps us with our reach. And thank you so much to everyone that supports us on Patreon. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.